One of the important questions that we dwelled into is building technology is only the first part of the entire story. How do you get it to be consumed? How do you get it to be adopted? The trust, that was the focus of a lot of our conversations. Having said that, I think it's incredible that Digi has convened this important meeting at a very astute time, because with a median age of 28, this is the conversation we need to be having. What do education institutions, what does the education sector need to do? I have a bit of a contrarian perspective on the way we think about the UPI movement. Before UPI, there was Aadhaar, which was already a DPI and DPG that was much celebrated. What Aadhaar did was give us identity credentials, and then UPI took that forward into the financial sector. But both of these were indeed a moment. UPI was a moment. Aadhaar was one moment. Education, on the other hand, health, on the other hand, agriculture, on the other hand, are incredibly vast subjects that have not just the central government, state government, private universities, but also impact a significant part of a human being's lifelong goals and skills. Therefore, I do not want a UPI moment in education. I want a different model for the way we look at the social sector DPI. And that requires a significant amount of agility. I'll just justify that with one conversation. With UPI, we can have a metric of transactions. We can have a metric of number of people on the platform. That is a reasonable starting metric. But with education, the metric becomes a lot more about skills, about learning. That metric cannot be taken merely with GER, or number of enrollments, or number of courses, or number of skills, especially in a changing world. Therefore, this conversation that we're having on education and how do we build DPI for education has to be grounded in what is the outcome, learning-based outcome that we hope to achieve. And therefore, that DPI should not be solving merely for moving sidewards in terms of credits, in terms of skills, but what allows students to move up. That would be my go-to sort of thinking in terms of how do we build DPI for education as well as health as well as agriculture. How does this allow for students to improve upon their life quality? Having said that, I think that one of the pivotal, as somebody who's had the opportunity to have a conversation on DPI across the world, the entire aspect of the DPI revolution in India, guided by the Prime Minister's vision, has been that government convenes the private sector. Government convenes different entities to come and innovate. Therefore, universities have a huge role. Madhavan sir spoke about what are these tangible ideas that can be, what are the MVPs that we can create. One of the MVPs, I think, is within a university ecosystem is their movement. As somebody who studied political science or economics, do I have the opportunity to also study an engineering related course within the university? That's a great start for us. In the university that I studied, had multiple schools. I had the opportunity of taking different courses across different schools, sometimes completely unrelated to my core subjects. Because what we're looking at today is not essentially a certificate or a diploma basis education, but a skill based education. And this is where the verifiable credential, the trust building starts. For industry, that is also a great way to assess. I'm guessing when hiring happens, today we're looking at emotional quotient, the ability to solve conflict. We're looking at the softer skills, or what is categorized as that value-based skills. These do not necessarily come only with a one focused education outcome. It comes with a larger outcome. And that is where universities can innovate on the DPI model. I'd like to bring in the concept of DPGs, which is also something that powers DPI. Universities could potentially, as an incentive, create their own DPGs within their functioning. DPGs that allow for credential transfer, DPGs that allow for skill-based verifiability, DPGs that allow for different things that could then be taken upwards as a scalable model. So universities as innovators is an important part of ensuring that DPI in education happens. A few other points. I think one of the things that I'm personally witnessing in the DPI revolution in India especially in subjects that are not just union subjects but are concurrent or state subjects, is while the central government, a central body, can put forth guidelines, can also create incentives, state governments must adapt very quickly. And if it's not uniform adaptation, at least there has to be the and I say this because I see Department of Higher Education across different states, state level competition on adoption of DPI, on thinking about what next for the education sector, is going to be the definitive way in which we innovate. Because as much as you put forth guidelines, if you do not have the implementation partners on ground, if this exact meeting doesn't happen in every state, sir, as you rightly said, this is the moment. If we do not have this conversation across states, then we will see laggard development in different places, and especially in states that are lower GDP, in states that do not have that kind of conversation. These were a few things that I thought were very important. And I'd also like to just end with one concept. As we look at the world, a very dynamic world going forward, an AI driven world going forward, and this is already in our NEP to a great extent, what is the Indian component to the DPI that we are building in education? What is the Indic component? One that differentiates us constantly is the scale at which we are dealing. And across the world, this is the first time that this sort of a technology, this sort of thinking has been implemented because of the scale that we are envisioning. Somebody spoke about, Madhavan sir spoke about the experimentation that happened in US or in Europe, convening a few universities together. In India, because of the scale of what we're dealing with, we need to have a different view altogether. So a scale first approach, but innovation happening at home is, I think, the model that we need to think through. And Indic approaches, Indic civilizational values as a component of how we think through our education DPI is much needed. Thank you.